Hosea receives the word of the Lord during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. The prophecy of Hosea begins with a title verse that provides the reader with some background information. The verse states that the word of the Lord came to Hosea, thus affirming the credibility of the prophet as well as the source of his message. Hosea was a true prophet because the word of the Lord, or God's revelation, came to him. Hosea was the son of Beeri. Besides this simple statement, virtually nothing else is known of Hosea's ancestors. His hometown is not mentioned either, but the references to the northern kingdom of Israel made throughout the book likely suggest that he was from the northern kingdom. What is known to us, however, is the time in which the prophet ministered. The Hebrew name Hosea means salvation and is a variant of the Hebrew name Joshua. The name Jesus in Hebrew is Yeshua and also comes from this same Hebrew root meaning salvation. According to the title verse, Hosea's ministry spanned much of the 8th century BC because he prophesied during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. According to 2 Chronicles, King Uzziah of Judah reigned 52 years in Jerusalem, 2 Chronicles 26:3, that may be placed from 792 to 740 BC. Uzziah was a good king in Judah, the southern kingdom, and because he did what was right, the Lord helped him and gave him victory over many nations, 2 Chronicles 26, 6-15. However, when he became famous, his heart was so proud that he acted corruptly by entering the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense, thus stepping into the priestly role, which was not his proper calling, 2 Chronicles 26:16. As a result of Uzziah's abuse of authority, the Lord struck Uzziah with leprosy, and his son Jotham ruled as co-regent with him from 750 until his death in 740 BC. Uzziah's son Jotham ruled the southern kingdom of Judah on his own until 732 BC. Following his death, his son Ahaz ruled in his place from 732 to 715 BC, 2 Kings 16:1-20. After the death of Ahaz, his son Hezekiah reigned in his place, 2 Kings 16:20. In addition to placing the ministry of Hosea during the reigns of the Judean kings, the title verse also places it during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. Israel was the northern kingdom. Jeroboam II ruled over the northern kingdom of Israel at a time that may be placed from 793 BC to 753 BC. Since Israel was stable politically and economically during the reign of Jeroboam II, and since Hosea prophesied during a time of turmoil, it may be assumed that he began his ministry in the latter years of King Jeroboam II of Israel, perhaps around 760 BC. Therefore, Hosea's ministry may be dated from around 760 BC to shortly after 715 BC, the first year of the reign of Hezekiah of Judah. The Lord commands Hosea to take an unfaithful wife and have children with her. Hosea's marriage and family serve to illustrate how the Israelites have forsaken their covenant partner Yahweh. At the very beginning of Hosea's prophetic work, the Lord gave him what seems to us a strange command. The text tells us that when the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord commanded him, saying, "Go, take to yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry." The verb to take is usually employed in the context of marrying someone. Genesis 4:19, Exodus 34:16. The word translated as harlotry, zanunim in Hebrew, describes the behavior of the woman who was to be Hosea's wife as a woman who was sexually promiscuous. God's command to Hosea to marry a wife of harlotry could have parallels to the story of Tamar, a Canaanite woman. Tamar was accused of harlotry because she became pregnant without having a husband. But Tamar was considered righteous because she had tricked her father-in-law Judah into sleeping with her by posing as a harlot. She did this because Judah had failed to provide her a husband, as was her right. Genesis 38:24-26. Tamar is honored by being listed as an ancestor of Jesus in Matthew's genealogy, Matthew 1:3. In Hosea's instance, God asked him to take a harlot as his wife in order to make a point to Israel. In each case, it seems that God makes a point about redeeming human brokenness. In a sense, the entire human race is adulterous, since all have sinned against their Creator, Romans 3:23. The most straightforward meaning of the text is that Gomer was an immoral woman who depended upon payment from her patrons in exchange for sex. In this way, God's command to Hosea to marry a wife of harlotry parallels his order to Isaiah to go naked and barefoot for 3 years, Isaiah 21:6, or his instructions to Ezekiel to avoid mourning and weeping for his beloved wife, Ezekiel 24:16. They all constitute outrageous behavior ordered by God, intended to get a point across. The second part of the command, in which God asked Hosea to have children of harlotry, does not necessarily mean that Hosea's children were illegitimate, having been fathered by another man. Rather, it means that the children would bear the reputation of their mother's attitude and conduct. As we will see, Hosea's wife will, apparently, bear Hosea's children, then go back to her old promiscuous ways. The reason Hosea was asked to marry a wife of harlotry was to display Israel's attitude toward their suzerain God, who cared for them as a faithful husband cares for his wife. Israel is unfaithful to its covenant with God, as a wife is unfaithful to her covenant with her husband, in this case because the land, the nation Israel, commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord. Israel had agreed to follow God's laws when it entered the covenant with him, Exodus 19:8. Now it is openly and flagrantly defying the laws it had agreed to faithfully follow. Thus, the prophet was instructed to build a family with an unfaithful woman, and his wife and children were to serve as an object lesson that demonstrated Israel's unfaithfulness to the suzerain ruler God, who was its faithful husband. In obedience to God's instructions, the prophet went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim. The root of Diblaim means cakes of figs. Because of this, Rashi, a 9th century rabbi, makes this comment: "They would tread upon her like a pressed fig." Debella. That is a euphemism for sexual contact. Thus, Gomer's mother is presumed to be a prostitute as well. Through Hosea's union with Gomer, 3 children were born. The Lord named the 3 children and gave each one a significant name. Although the children were real and their names were real, each name was also symbolic. Gomer, Hosea's wife, first conceived and bore him a son. The Lord commanded Hosea to name his son Jezreel, a name that means God sows or God scatters. Here there is a wordplay between the word Israel and Jezreel. These 2 words sound almost alike in the Hebrew language. The term Jezreel appears as a proper name in 1 Chronicles 4:3 and as the name of a town in Judah, the place where David had taken one of his wives, Ahinoam, 1 Samuel 25:43. It should also be noted that Jezreel was the name of the place where Naboth had his vineyard, beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. 1 Kings 21:1. King Ahab wanted the vineyard, but Naboth refused to sell it. So Ahab's wife, Jezebel, had Naboth stoned to death. 1 Kings 21:1-15. Consequently, the Lord pronounced judgment on Ahab's family to take place in Jezreel. Jezreel is also the name of the valley where the city of Megiddo is located. It is accordingly also known as Armageddon, which means Hill of Megiddo. In 841 BC, Jehu, at the command of the Lord, destroyed the line of Ahab and became king himself. 1 Kings 19-17-18, 2 Kings 9-10. During his massacre, Jehu assassinated Joram, the king of Israel, and Ahab's successor, just outside the walls of Jezreel. He then sent letters to the royal officials in Samaria, asking them to kill the sons of Ahab and send their heads to Jezreel. So Jehu killed all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his great men and his acquaintances and his priests, until he left him without a survivor. 2 Kings 10:11. Thus, Jezreel had become a place for violence, murder, and shedding of blood. Jehu was used by God to destroy the dynasty of Ahab, and the Lord commended him, saying, "Because you have done well in performing what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab in accordance with everything that was in my heart, your sons to the 4th generation shall sit on the throne of Israel." 2 Kings 10:30. Through this wordplay between Jezreel and Israel, the Lord announced that he would scatter Israel throughout the nations. This prophecy was fulfilled in 722 BC, when the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom of Israel and scattered them throughout the earth to cause them to be weakened as a nation. However, because Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord with all his heart, 2 Kings 10:31, the Lord pronounces here in Hosea judgment on Jehu's line using the name Jezreel, saying, "For yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel." God expected Jehu to learn from what happened at Jezreel, since Jehu was the instrument God used to carry out his judgment on Ahab's family. Unfortunately, Jehu did not learn from that experience and was not careful to walk in God's ways. Therefore, Jehu fell under the same judgment as Ahab. This prophecy was fulfilled in 752 BC, when Shallum assassinated the son of Jeroboam II, Zechariah, who was the 4th of Jehu's line to reign on his throne, 2 Kings 15:8-12. The Lord then added, "On that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." The term bow was the common long-distance weapon of the ancient Near Eastern nations, 1 Kings 22:34, 1 Samuel 31:3, Jeremiah 46:9. It is used here metaphorically to represent the military power of the nation Israel. The Lord said he would break Israel's military strength in the famous battleground of the valley of Jezreel to cause the nation to become weak. This prophecy was likely fulfilled in 733 BC, when Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria defeated an Aramean Israelite coalition. He struck Israel with full force, overran all Israelite lands in Galilee and in the eastern part of the Jordan River, and deported portions of the population. 2 Kings 15:29. This was the beginning of the end of the nation Israel, which was completely destroyed by the Assyrians in 722 BC. This will be reversed in the last days of the age, when the armies of the nations gather in the Jezreel Valley, also called Armageddon, to go up against Israel, where they will be destroyed. Jezreel will be used in this chapter both in the sense of scattering as well as gathering. God uses the name Jezreel in the first of this chapter to picture the scattering of Israel from the land because of its disobedience. In the last part of the chapter, God will use Jezreel again to indicate the regathering of Israel as a kingdom under a single monarch, which will be the Messiah, the son of David. Hosea's wife gives birth to a daughter, and the Lord commands Hosea to name her Lo-Ruhamah, meaning no mercy, because he will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel. Sometime after Hosea's wife had her first son Jezreel, v4, she conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. The Lord instructed Hosea to name her Lo-Ruhamah. This word is made up of two Hebrew words. The first one is the negative particle lo, meaning no or not, while the second word, Ruhamah, means mercy, compassion, or pity. Together, the name of the child means no compassion or no mercy. The child was real, and Lo-Ruhamah was her real name. But her name was also symbolic because it foreshadowed Yahweh's looming discipline of his covenant people, Israel. God made it clear when he stated, "For I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, that I would ever forgive them." Thus, the birth of Ruhamah was an announcement of the demise of Israel. Some 30 years after giving this prophecy to Hosea, God withdrew his mercy and his protective hand from Israel, and the nation fell to the Assyrian Empire in 722 BC. God means what he says. The phrase that I would ever forgive them can also be rendered, but I would utterly take them away. He would no longer forgive the iniquity of the northern kingdom of Israel and pass over its iniquities, but would deport them from the land as a consequence for their breaking of their covenant with him. God will restore them later, but there will be no forgiveness during this age of kings. It will end. Although the suzerain or ruler God would no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, he would continue to show his favor to Judah. He began the statement on Judah with the conjunction "but" to show the contrast between what he had just said about Israel and what he was about to say concerning Judah. "But I will have compassion on the house of Judah." The suzerain God would continue to extend his favor to Judah. He would continue to guide, protect, and preserve them. He stated that he would deliver them by the Lord their God, not by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen. The bow was a weapon used in war and in hunting, Genesis 27:3, Joshua 24:12. It was often used in long-range attacks. Like the bow, the sword along with horses and horsemen were heavily used in warfare. Here God declared that Judah would not have to rely on superiority of weapons or needing their own strength to be superior. As their suzerain, the Lord would personally intervene for Judah in supernatural ways to give them victory over their enemies. This prophecy anticipated Jerusalem's deliverance from Sennacherib of Assyria in 701 BC. According to the Book of Kings, when Sennacherib of Assyria attacked the people of Judah, the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when men rose early in the morning, behold, all of them were dead. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. 2 Kings 19:35-36. Hosea's wife gives birth to a third child, and the Lord commands Hosea to name him Ami, meaning that the Israelites are not God's people. After Gomer had weaned her second child, Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son. The verb to wean means to stop nursing a child after a period of time. In ancient Israel, the weaning process was usually completed with a great celebration, Genesis 21:8. Gomer weaned Ruhamah before giving birth to her third child. Once the third child was born, the Lord commanded Hosea, as he did for the previous two children. He asked Hosea to name the child Ami. The word is the negative particle meaning no or not, and the word Ami means my people. When read together, the child's name means not my people. Like the previous two names, this name too was symbolic. Its meaning is seen in the next statement where the Lord said, "For you are not my people, and I am not your God." Thus, Ruhamah signified that the Lord no longer considered the nation Israel to be his people. They had broken the covenant with him and were no longer under his care. As we will see, that does not mean that God had forsaken them. It does mean they were no longer under his rule and therefore under his care. He was removing his protection as their suzerain ruler, as was agreed to in their covenant with the Lord. While the Abrahamic covenant was unconditional and would never be broken, Israel's blessings were conditional. The blessings were dependent upon obedience to God's covenantal precepts. As the suzerain, or ruler, the Lord commanded the Israelites to live in obedience to his stipulations in order to live long in the land he promised to them, a land flowing with milk and honey, Deuteronomy 26:9. But the Israelites refused to listen to God's instructions, despite all the warnings of the prophets. Therefore, in the book of Hosea, The Lord declared that Israel's sins and iniquities have nullified the blessings they could have enjoyed from their suzerain God, Yahweh. Nevertheless, because of his covenant faithfulness, the Lord would not abandon his people forever. One day, he will restore Israel and her fortunes and will take her back to himself, as the next section makes clear. V'yasht 10:11. The Lord promises to restore Israel and Judah. He states that the nation will experience a great increase in population and will be gathered together under one leader. This section begins the second chapter of Hosea in the Hebrew text. With a radical shift in tone, the prophet Hosea stopped talking about the doom of the northern kingdom of Israel to predict the restoration of both Israel and Judah. Although the Lord would decimate the Israelite population in his judgment, Amos 5:3, he would one day reverse the curse to increase them beyond measure. As Hosea stated, "Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered." The phrase, "the sons of Israel," is an idiom referring to the Israelites. The statement that Israel will be like the sand of the sea indicates that the Israelites would become numerous, Joshua 11:4. The statement recalls the promise God made to Abraham in which he said, "Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore." Genesis 22:17. Because God is faithful to his words, the prophecy would surely be fulfilled. Their current disobedience would be appropriately dealt with, but God's ultimate design for Israel and his promise to Abraham would be completely fulfilled. Hosea also stated that Israel's numerical increase would be the result of a new relationship that the suzerain ruler, God, would establish with them. And in the place where it said to them, "You are not my people," it will be said to them, "You are the sons of the living God." Israel was disciplined by God, but would be restored to fellowship with God through faithful obedience. Once the fellowship is renewed, the Israelites will be called the sons of the living God. In the ancient suzerain vassal treaty structure, a faithful vassal would be given land and adoption into the royal family as a reward for faithful service. This verse predicts that Israel will once again live faithfully as unto the Lord, and therefore be called sons. We see this same pattern in the reward of Jesus for faithful service. He was already the Son of God in his relationship with the Father, but he was given the title of Son as a reward for his faithful service, Hebrews 1:5. Israel never stops being God's chosen people. That relationship was given by God through his favor, Deuteronomy 7:6-8. But their obedience is required to restore fellowship with God. They will have fellowship with the Lord as they once had in Deuteronomy, and will be sufficiently faithful as to receive the reward of being called sons. Finally, Hosea declared that God's renewed relationship with Israel will result in the reunification of the nation. The nation Israel enjoyed a glorious time as a united monarchy under King David and King Solomon. However, the once united monarchy in the days of David and Solomon collapsed because Solomon's son and successor Rehoboam rejected the advice of the elders who told him to modify Solomon's policies of taxation and forced labor. Consequently, when all the people of Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, Israel departed to their tents. None but the tribe of Judah followed the house of David. 1 Kings 12:16-20. Ever since the death of Solomon, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah remained divided. However, the Lord promised to reunite the two kingdoms one day. This division was God's discipline for Solomon's disobedience, 1 Kings 11:13. Not only will the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel be gathered together, they will appoint for themselves one leader. The leader will serve as the head of both kingdoms and will come from the branch of David. Amos 9:11, Jeremiah 23:5. This is a messianic prediction that one from the lineage of David will unite the kingdom once again. This will be Jesus when he returns to earth again in his glory. He will reunite the kingdom of Israel and reign as its king. Jesus is a descendant of David, Matthew 1:1. He will return to earth just as he departed, Acts 1:11, and he will restore the kingdom to Israel, Acts 1:6-7, Revelation 20:4-6. Finally, the Israelites will go up from the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Since the name Jezreel means God sows, in addition to God scatters, God uses Jezreel here to mean that he would sow the Israelites again into their land. He would plant the Israelites back in their land, in the very place of Jezreel. The people who were scattered, Jezreel, will once again be freshly sown or planted, Jezreel, in their land. Hosea 2:23. The Lord anticipates a time when he will once again accept Israel as his people and have compassion on them. Hosea 2:1 is transitional in that it is linked to the theme of restoration that began in the latter part of the previous chapter, Hosea 1:10-11, and to the command in the next verse, where the children are asked to contend with their mother, Hosea 2:2. Speaking to the nation Israel, the Lord incorporated the names of Hosea's children in his prophecy and declared, "Say to your brothers, Ami, and to your sisters, Ruhamah." The term Ami means my people, and the term Ruhamah means compassion. In essence, the verse states that in the future, lo, Ami or not my people in 1:9 will be replaced by Ami or my people. Also, lo, Ruhamah, meaning not compassion in 1:6, will be replaced by Ruhamah, meaning that she has obtained compassion. Thus, just as Jezreel represents the nation, 1:11, Ami and Ruhamah here represent all the people of the restored Judah and Israel, now united together under one head, as they were in the time of King David. This fulfillment looks forward to a time when Jesus will return to earth and reunite Israel and take the throne of his ancestor David, Acts 1:6, Zechariah 14:4-16, Revelation 19:11-16, 20:4-6. In summary, Hosea 1:10-1 speaks of a time when God's judgment on the nation Israel will be reversed. The Israelites who were once cast out from the Lord will be restored. Those who were once scattered will be sown in the land on the great day of Jezreel. At that time, the Lord will forgive the sins of the nation and accept the people as his own people. During this glorious time, the remnant of the restored covenant community of the future, those who will obtain the mercy of God, will greet one another with their new identity and rejoice in their acceptance by God. They will be urged to call their brothers, Ami, my people, and their sisters, Ruhamah, compassion, because they will experience the love and compassion of the Lord. The Lord urges his children to denounce their mother for her shameful behavior, lest they follow her and fall under the same judgment that awaits her. This section uses the analogy of Hosea's marriage and family to describe God's relationship with his covenant people, Israel. The nation has cheated on the suzerain God, just as Gomer has cheated on Hosea. This section exposes Israel's idolatry, which further explains why the Lord asked Hosea to marry an unfaithful wife in the first place, as an illustration to Israel of how they have treated their husband, God. Whereas in the preceding verse, the children were urged to speak with their brothers and sisters, 2:1, here they are to speak with their mother. The Lord asked the children, saying, "Contend with your mother, contend." The verb translated contend is used twice here for emphasis. The term mother stands for the nation Israel, the soil from which these future children will come forth. The mother is also God's wife, because the nation Israel was God's covenant partner, having entered into covenant with God at Mount Sinai, which was the marriage of Israel to their God, Exodus 19:8. In this passage, Hosea called upon his children to chastise their mother for her unfaithfulness. Following this analogy, the Lord is calling upon individual Israelites, his children, to repudiate their mother, the nation Israel, for her shameful behavior. The children were to denounce their mother's attitude and actions and separate themselves from her, lest they suffered the same punishment that awaited her. The Lord then provided the reason why his children were to denounce their mother. For she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. On the surface, this statement appears to be a formal declaration of divorce. However, the context suggests that it is more like a time of separation prior to a divorce, and this was an appeal to repentance and restoration. The suzerain ruler and husband God, maker of the covenant, called on his wife Israel to repent from her shameful and adulterous actions so that his relationship with her might be restored. He still desired oneness with Israel, and that is why he commanded his children to contend with their mother. Repentance was needed so that healing and reconciliation might take place. God continued to say, "Let her put away her harlotry from her face and her adultery from between her breasts." The word face is used to display the intent and character of the adulterous wife. By turning away her face from adultery and harlotry, she would make a choice to follow a righteousness path, a path of chastity to her husband, who is God. This means she is making a choice to focus upon and follow God rather than the lovers with whom she is committing adultery. The word breasts represents her body. In addition to turning her attention, focus, and devotion away from harlotry and adultery, God desired that she restore intimacy with him. When a husband and wife enjoy sexual oneness, it also creates spiritual oneness. 1 Corinthians 6:15-17. God commanded Israel to turn away from the pagan gods and to cling to him because he alone was her covenant marriage partner. As such, he required the exclusive loyalty necessary for a healthy marriage. God desired oneness and fidelity. He is still willing to extend mercy and forgive her. But the offer of repentance is not indefinite. The Lord then spelled out several calamities that would fall upon the nation Israel if she refused to repent. First, he said he would strip her naked. To strip means to remove something. In this case, it has to do with removing the woman's clothes so that she might remain naked. God would strip his wife naked and expose her as on the day when she was born. Such an act would make her an object of humiliation and embarrassment. The penalty would be appropriate for Israel's sexual crime because she had exposed herself through her harlotry and adultery. Israel would experience shame and humiliation for violating God's covenantal laws. Second, God said he would make his wife like a wilderness, an uncultivated and inhospitable place. He would remove her fertility to make her like desert land, a place deprived of water. Just as plants need water to grow, human beings need water and other substances to survive. Because of Israel's unfaithfulness, the Lord threatened to make her like a desert land and slay her with thirst. In addition to being spiritual, this could be literal, saying that God would plague Israel with drought, a prolonged shortage in the water supply. This would be disastrous. Last but not least, God said he would have no compassion on his wife's children, because they are children of harlotry. Individual Israelites were called children of harlotry because they were born to an unfaithful or immoral mother, the land of Israel. As God pointed out, their mother has played the harlot. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. Thus, the children bore the shame and guilt of their mother's attitude and conduct. Therefore, God announced that his wife's children would not receive his compassion or his love. The reason for this was because his wife misunderstood his provisions for her. Her own declaration explained her intentions and actions. For she said, "I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink." The terms bread and water stand for physical nourishment. The term wool refers to the textile fiber that can be obtained from the hair of sheep. It is used to make warm clothes, Proverbs 31:13. The term for flax pertains to a grass-like plant which gives soft fibers for making cooler clothes, Proverbs 31:13. Thus, wool and flax stand for protection of the body. Finally, oil and drink stand for pleasure and entertainment. The items above formed the basis of the ancient Near Eastern economy and were the symbols of fertility granted to Israel by the Lord, her covenant partner, Jeremiah 31:12. But Israel thought she received these items from Baal, the Canaanite god. Israel thought she could manipulate the power of this false god in order to meet her needs. For this reason, God declared that his wife acted shamefully. Through the husband-wife metaphor, the Lord made clear that Israel committed spiritual adultery by going after other gods with whom she had no covenant relationship. Israel thought that Baal, 3-4, the so-called fertility god, 3-4 provided for her, but it was always the Lord, Israel's covenant partner, who met all her needs. For this reason, the Lord was about to confront her. God would punish the nation because she had transgressed his covenantal precepts, as contained in the covenant law they had entered into with God, Exodus 19:8. God's judgment on Israel was an indication of God's gracious love to her. Under the covenant God had entered, for whom the Lord loves he reproves, Proverbs 3:12, Hebrews 12-6. God chose Israel as his covenant partner and wanted to make sure she obeyed the terms of the covenant for her own good. That is why he called individual Israelites to rebuke the nation, to invite them to play a part in bringing the nation to repentance. The Lord describes his judgment on Israel because she goes after other gods. Since Israel credits the fertility gods such as Baal for providing for her needs, the suzerain God declares that he will prevent her from all means of access to cause her to return to him. This section is built upon the previous one, in which the suzerain God described Israel's unfaithfulness as she went after pagan gods and worshipped them instead of worshipping the true God, Yahweh, Vebda 2-5. Here the nation Israel is accused of ingratitude and idolatry and is sentenced accordingly. The Lord began this section with the particle behold to announce the imminent judgment on his wife and said, "Therefore I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her." To hedge up the way is to bar it or to fence it. God would obstruct Israel's way so that she could not find her paths. God would rightly oppose her in her pursuit of pagan gods and idols. As a result, she would pursue her lovers, but she would not overtake them. Israel would pursue other gods, but she would not succeed. She would seek them, but would not find them. This meant that all her efforts would be futile. Her search would yield no fruit. It would produce nothing but frustration. Frustrated in all her undertakings, Israel would say, "I will go back to my first husband, for it was better for me then than now." Her own words would demonstrate the inferiority of her false gods, as well as the superiority of the true God, whom she had rejected. She would now seek to return to the Lord, who was her first husband, the one who redeemed her from slavery in Egypt and accompanied her throughout her difficult and perilous wilderness journey. Deuteronomy 5:6, 8:15. Indeed, Israel failed to understand God's gracious love toward her. She could not realize that it was the Lord, her husband and covenant partner, who had been providing for her. As the Lord stated, she does not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the new wine, and the oil. The grain, the new wine, and the oil were the three essential agricultural products in ancient times, Deuteronomy 14:23. The Lord provided Israel with all these agricultural products to make sure all her basic needs were met. But besides providing Israel with these necessities, the Lord provided luxuries as well, and lavished on her silver and gold, symbolizing riches and wealth. That means the suzerain God gave Israel abundance. Although Israel lived an abundant life, she failed to give thanks to the Lord. Instead, she used her silver and gold to make or fabricate Baal idols. The worship of Baal involved sexual immorality, providing a moral rationale to pursue lusts. All idolatry included a promise of manipulation, that the idol could be manipulated so its followers could gain their desires. Instead of gratitude for God's provision and seeking to obey Him, they sought after their own lusts by following Baal. For this reason, the suzerain God declared that He would take back His grain at harvest time and His new wine in its season. Israel would be deprived of her agricultural products. The harvest seasons would yield no grain, and there would be no grapes to produce wine. This curse recalls one of the curses in Deuteronomy 28. Cursed shall be the offspring of your body, and the produce of your ground, the increase of your herd, and the young of your flock. Deuteronomy 28:18. God's covenant relationship with Israel was dependent upon Israel's behavior. Blessings were promised for obedience to the covenantal laws, and curses for disobedience. God set up the cause-effect relationship. It was up to Israel to choose its path and the resulting consequences. In picturing Israel as a woman, the Lord said He would take away His wool and His flax, given to cover her nakedness. She would then have no clothes to cover herself or to protect her body. Through this destitution, the Lord would uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers. Israel would experience shame and would be exposed to the grand public. Her lovers would not be able to help because the Lord stated, "No one will rescue her out of my hand." God's judgment on Israel would be severe and would demonstrate that God, not Baal, is the possessor and giver of all gifts. Moreover, God would put an end to all Israel's gaiety, her feasts, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her festal assemblies. The term feast is used to refer to the 3 annual festivals celebrated in Israel: the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. Exodus 23:14-17, Deuteronomy 16:1-17. These feasts and festal assemblies included sacrifices and worship, but were intended to provide enjoyment, gaiety. The new moon, also called the Feast of Trumpets, refers to a religious festival that was celebrated on the first day of the lunar month, Tishri, September, October, as mandated by Moses in Leviticus 23:23-24. This celebration corresponds to our New Year's Day. Like the new moon, the Sabbath was a day of rest and feasting. It was celebrated on the 7th day of the week to commemorate both creation, Exodus 20:8-11, and Israel's redemption from slavery in Egypt, Deuteronomy 5:12-15. The prescribed sacrifice for the Sabbath day consisted of 2 male lambs, 1 year old without defect, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering and its drink offering. Numbers 28:9. Religious feasts and activities that were normally regarded as joyful occasions, Isaiah 30:29, would come to an end. This likely means Israel will be exiled from the land, and the tabernacle representing God's presence will be destroyed. All these things had been corrupted by idol worship. The Lord would cancel all the festal assemblies. He would also destroy Israel's vines and fig trees, of which she said, "These are my wages, which my lovers have given me." The term for wage here is etna, which refers to a gift to a harlot in return for her service. Israel would lose her vineyards and fruit trees, which were actually God's blessing, but were instead regarded by Israel as gifts from false gods to whom they had played the harlot. God would make them a forest, and the beasts of the field would devour them, indicating that the land would become uninhabited. All Israel's gifts would be gone. Israel thought she was secure when she turned to the pagan gods, but that was not the case. The suzerain God, the all-powerful one who had provided for Israel, would remove her abundance to cause her to understand her spiritual condition. This was in accord with the covenant Israel had entered into and consistent with the punishment prescribed within the covenant to which they had agreed, Exodus 19:8. The Lord would thus punish Israel for the days of the Baals. The phrase, the days of the Baals, refer to the Canaanite cultic festivals. During these cultic feasts, Israel used to offer sacrifices and adorn herself with her earrings and jewelry and follow her lovers. In doing so, she completely forgot the Lord. She followed in the way of the Canaanites, which was a way of exploitation and child sacrifice, as described in Leviticus 18. Therefore, she would be severely punished. She would be forgotten just as she forgot the Lord for a time. Israel would be severely judged for violating God's covenantal precepts by acknowledging Baal as her God and by forgetting the self-existent God, Yahweh, the one who redeemed her from slavery and continued to provide for all her needs. Nevertheless, God's punishment would not be his final action. He would one day restore the nation Israel and reclaim her as his own wife, as the next section indicates. The Lord promises to restore Israel along with her fortunes. He will reverse all the curses that fall on her and sow her for himself in the land. God's indictment on Israel and prediction of exile and destitution, verse 6:13, is followed by a beautiful section dealing with Israel's future restoration, verses 14-23. In the first two verses, God promised to restore his love for Israel. The Lord began the section with the particle, therefore, which clearly refers back to the section about Israel's punishment by God, via 6-13. However, therefore, does not continue the theme of judgment, as one might expect. Rather, it unexpectedly switches from Israel's judgment to her complete restoration by God. This indicates that God's purpose in punishing his wife Israel was his way of pruning her to ensure she was molded enough to repent and turn to him. In other words, God had no intention of abandoning Israel. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable, Romans 11:29. But because he is holy, God keeps the terms of the covenant and deals with sin to restore his people to fellowship with him.